so, but I guess you changed her mind. Well, I should have known it wouldn't be alright, but I can't live without her, so I won't even try. If I get drunk, well, I'll pass out on the floor now, baby. You won't bother me no more. If you're drinking, well, you know that you're my friend, and I'll say, I think I'll have myself a beer. Someday I'll think of what to say. Maybe next time I'll remember what to do. She looks like heaven, maybe this is hell. She said she'd do it all again, she promised not to tell. If I get drunk, well, I'll pass out on the floor now, baby. You won't bother me no more. She said, well, it's okay, boy, 'cause you know we'll be good friends, and I'll say, I think I'll have myself a beer. I think I'll have myself a whoa, 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 yeah, yeah, yeah.
There were three men came out of the west, their fortunes for to try. And these three men made a solemn vow. John Barleycorn must die. They've plowed, they've sown, they've harrowed him in through clods upon his head. And these three men made a solemn vow. John Barleycorn was dead. They've let him lie for a very long time, till the rains from heaven did fall, and little Sir John sprung up his head, and so amazed them all. They've let him stand till midsummer's day, till he looked both pale and drawn. And little Sir John's grown a long, long beard, and so become a man. the side so sharp to cut him off at the knee. They rolled him and tied him by the way, serving him most barbarously. They've hired men with the sharp pitchforks who pricked him to the heart. And the loader, he has served him worse than that, for he's bound him to the car. They've wheeled him around and around the field till they came onto a barn, and there they made a solemn oath on poor John Barleycorn. They've hired men with a crabtree sticks
to hopefully our last virtual monthly meeting for 2021. We shall see how things change if they don't, but hopefully next time it will be in person. Please tell us what you're drinking. Leave us messages in the comments so we can see and share what people are drinking. Next slide. These are our upcoming events. We do have an in-person happy hour scheduled for August, and then our August meeting will be at the church. Parkville is October 16th, and our Brewfest is the week before on October 9th. Next slide. There is the Parkville information. If you have any questions regarding organization, I understand Jake is handling all that. So yeah, if you need to donate beers or sign up for stuff, talk to Jake. And we have people telling us what they're drinking. We got a Martin City Hardway, Casey Beer Dunkel, Homebrew Red Ale, and Hopped Nerve IPA from Free State, some crazy pineapple papaya Fandango, and another weird named beer. I'm assuming it's a homemade beer. July Jubilee Wilcott Brewing Cream Ale. That sounds tasty. They all sound tasty. All right, on to Brewfest stuff. We got most of our committee chairs filled and started on their different processes. And so that's cool. And we hope to have some updates on that and how it goes soon. Next slide. Speaking of updates, Matt Bechtold, our logistics head, would like to provide some updates and get some feedback on t-shirts and glasses.
All right, everybody. So at the last happy hour, we talked about glassware for those who were there. Those of you who were not there, we're looking at doing something a little different since it's the 25th Brewfest. And one of the choices that we came up with was the Craftmaster style glass. I liked it because they had a large print area at the top with a good bowl shape for aroma. And the neck of the glass below, the body of the glass below had a good hip to it, so people hopefully won't drop their glasses. And that hip line is, thanks to Lynette, we've discovered is about 3 ounces. So it's a pretty good short pour for those people who wanted just to get a 3-ounce pour of each beer. They are a little more expensive than the traditional shaker pint that we've always done. So that is also an option. And I would kind of like a decision tonight about the glassware. So if you can, please use the chat and post whether you would like the Craftmaster or the standard traditional mixing pint. A little information on those. At the 240 glasses quantity that we've traditionally, I think, gotten for the pints, we're looking at about $315. And for the Craftmasters, it's closer to $495. So that's about $180 more than the shaker pint if we get 240. That number may change a little bit as we know how many tickets are sold and how many donations we have, etc. We also in the past have gotten 200 koozies. The koozies won't fit the Craftmaster glass, so that's a point of contention for some. We could also, instead of get koozies, we have talked about maybe doing a hat, like a trucker style hat, or we could have some patches made. This is an idea that Jared put forward about a custom patch for the Lawrence Brewers Guild that could then be put on a hat or a beanie or whatever kind of hat you might want, or on, as whatever you want to put it on, like your backpacks or shirts or what have you. The patches are between $2.50 and $3 a piece cost. Or he could do hats for like $15 a hat per cap with the patch. His cost on those is about $6. He's looking to make about $15 a hat. That's his cost, and then we could make some decent money on those if we wanted to go that route. So yeah, if we could, everybody's had a chance to vote. Who's here in the chat? Looks like the Craftmaster is the favorite. We can have the treasurer sign in on costs on these things, but I think for the keeping the glassware under 500 has been pretty much well within budget. It's the extra stuff like the koozies or patches or hats that might take us above where we might normally be.
There is a question about patch price.
The patches, the cost would be $2.50 to $3. He says they're like a woven patch. Apparently they're very cool. I haven't seen them. As far as what we could do with it and how many colors and things like that, I don't have a whole lot of information on those. I really just got that information right before the meeting. So yes, Jake, you make an excellent point that lead times are rough on glassware this year with COVID and everyone opening back up the way it has been. So yeah, I want to get this order in pretty much immediately after this meeting. So I just really need a volume and a glass type, and we'll go from there. Yeah, koozies and hats would be sold above cost so that we can make a little money. And ideally the glassware wouldn't be a huge money sink just because they're the mixing pints are like $1.31 each, and the Craftmaster's $2.06 at the volume that we're looking at.
There was a question about custom stickers for the Brewfest.
I haven't talked to anyone about stickers yet. We have done stickers in the past. I'm not sure who printed those for us. But I know that we had quite a few left at the end of each month, and then at the end of every meeting, we just kept bringing them out. I know we were practically giving them away towards the end. Generally, are you here and can you speak to that? I don't remember if maybe you had some part in that or whomever did. Okay, so she used Vistaprint for stickers and we sold the bulk and got our money back. So pretty much broke even, it sounds like.
So it's possible. I think we should.
It's totally possible. So patches that could be attached to a variety of hats. I kind of like the idea about doing that because it gives some variety and people can customize them however they want, put them on whatever they want. So instead of a printed trucker hat or embroidered something that would be very expensive, we could just make the patches and have him put them on hats or put them on anything. And then koozies as an option. Those were 200 koozies for roughly $212. We could do the same kind of 4-color options that we had done in the past, 50 of each color. And then the Craft Master seems to be the popular choice. Dale, I want you to know, buddy, I looked and getting an extra few like a case or two of pints. It was just a little too rich, but I want you to know I tried. That's all I have for now on glassware. Oh, we will have t-shirts. Pre-orders is already on the forum. So if you want a t-shirt and you know you're going to get one no matter what, please sign up there. We are going to do a trailer inventory night. Please sign up if you can. We'll have dates for that soon. And for the t-shirts, we'll have artwork as soon as Jared can put that together for us, but it's in the works.
Cool. Thank you. And next slide. All right, the donations is live on the forums. Frank, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So if you haven't seen, the donations are live on the forums just as the meeting starts, which is generally my MO. If you're a currently paid member, and you should see the highlighted in red, the members section, and then the Brewfest topic in there. Inside there is the donation form, standard donation form we've had every year. If you don't see that section and you're currently paid, you need to email or message Jake or myself. If it goes through Jake, it's a little bit faster because he's the one that has the member roles. I don't. Jake should have access to promote you. If he doesn't, I can do it also to the members role. Once you donate, there'll be a cool little thing that we always use to show who's donated, what they've donated, what beers styles are being out there. I had the URL and I've lost it now, but that's generally it. Same thing as every year. Limited to about 90 kegs. You can buy 3 tickets per 90 keg. There might be 2 tickets per 90 kegs. If in the event that we get too many donations or tickets are running short and we need to make sure people have the option to buy some tickets without selling out. And the sooner you get them in, the better.
Cool, thank you. Next, we still have our equipment share network that needs people to be willing to lend stuff to other people as they need it. Please email me with that email or contact any of the officers to edit the list. Next slide. There's the link to view the spreadsheet and see what is already there. So really would like to try to get that intern group networking started. Okay, next slide. And we are on to Jake.
Okay, thanks, Lynette. So real quick, before we get into membership and financials, I do want to say that because we've had some questions in the chat about finances for Brewfest, we're in good position really to do something special for this Brewfest. I think, as was already pointed out, any of, the koozies or hats or any of that stuff will be sold just a little above cost, and we'll probably end up with, some extras, and we'll still end up breaking even. So those are absolutely extra, but as far as the glasses go, I think we're in good shape to afford the extra cost for those glasses. Not to mention, last year we had already kind of as a club, decided that we wanted to do something special and dedicate a little bit more money for that. Um, so we're in good shape for that. Okay, go ahead and go to the membership slide, Frank. So we are at 75 paid members, which is pretty good. It's pretty good. It's better than we did last year, and I think that it's a good spot for us. Still seeing some memberships come in slowly, so that's good. And don't forget about your discounts. Those are an ask when you're at a brewery. You never know, even if it's not on the list, you might still get a discount. Okay, so let's talk about financials for June. Um, so we had several memberships come in. That's the bulk of our income. No expenses as far as June goes. We will have a few things come in for July. We'll talk about next month, but we're sitting in good shape at 7,000 total, and we had a total income of $211. And so if we look at the next slide, you can see it's actually been pretty steady all year in each month. It's pretty interesting. So yeah, that's it for treasurer.
Thank you. And now we will see if Tara has anything new for us.
I do not have anything new, but I still have the books. You're welcome to come check them out. And there's my phone number on the slide. If you want to check a book out or want to find out what we have, I'll send you a list and you can check out a book. Gotta be a paid member.
Cool, thanks. I think I may need a book. So next, we updates on the forums. We got Brewfest signups. We got a swap meet. We got some kegs for sale. Just keep an eye on the forums and Facebook for all of the Brewfest updates and signups and all that jazz. Okay. And now we have Josh and our seminar speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Lynette. I'm very excited to introduce and welcome our very special guest tonight. We have none other than Mike Tonsmere, the Mad Fermentationist. He is the author of American Sour Beers, the co-owner of Sapwood Cellar Brewery, and overall just a huge asset in the homebrewing community for the past several years. Mike, really honored to have you here. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can get on to the questions.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for sending me some beer so I get to try it along with everybody else. I've been homebrewing since 2005. I took a class my senior year in college, and probably ended up being the most important class I took because I spent 10 years in as an economist, and now I've already spent 15 years as making beer in one capacity or another. I spent some time consulting. I worked with Modern Times, sort of most prevalently, but I also did some stuff for Urban South and Bottle Logic and Jay Wakefield, and got to meet a lot of like really cool people and a lot of really passionate people who were either making that step from home brewer to professional brewer, or looking to sort of add sour beers or something else to their brewery's portfolio. I said for a long time that I wasn't going to be a professional brewer, that I like being a home brewer with a desk job. But after 10 years sitting at a desk, I decided it was really time to try and make the leap. And a couple of home brews at a local DC homebrewers meeting with my friend Scott Janish, and all of a sudden we were opening a brewery together. It's been surprisingly okay. We sort of survived COVID We've been doing a lot more beer in cans, a lot more beer in bottles, a lot less draft the last 14 or 15 months. But honestly, we were in a good position. We were a small brewery with sort of a really devoted and passionate fan base, and so they were willing to come out and make it, the only stop they would do for the week, and go home with a case, where they maybe used to stop in once or twice for a 6-pack. But yeah, we do like a lot of hazy IPAs, a lot of barrel aged sours, and now we're sort of moving into the bigger, more interesting stouts and those sorts of things as we moved all our sour gear to a separate storage unit in the same complex as us. But we're somewhere between Baltimore and DC, so if you ever find yourself in that general zone, stop by. We don't do much distribution at this point. We don't send any beer out of Maryland other than every once in a while for like a festival or something like that. But yeah, please stop me if you want to riff on a question and have more details about something I said. If you're the one who asked the question, feel free to chime in. I'll read the questions. I got a list of them from Josh a couple of weeks ago, and I have not even read them. So you'll be finding out relatively unfiltered and unprepared what I think. But I appreciate everyone who's saying questions. I always find these things a lot more interesting and beneficial when it's a conversation more than me just going through prepared remarks that I've given a dozen times and that you can probably listen to on Basic Brewing Radio or Beersmith or one of the other podcasts I've been on. Cool. Any questions about any of that, or should I just pop into the questions? Cool. So I guess Josh put this together because he has put his question first. I guess no surprise.
Yep. And I can read them for you, or if you want to go ahead and read them, that's fine as well.
Either way, if you want to read them just to give my voice a little break, I'm happy to.
Yep, I can do that. Some of these are a little long-winded. I've got some secondary follow-up questions as well. But yes, I did go first, which is a little bit selfish here, but I had that power, I guess. So the first question for myself is that I've read that you use chit malt in the hazy IPAs at Sapwood in place of oats or wheat. And I was curious if you had noticed a difference with the stability in long-term haze.
Sure. So I would say that we don't use it. We still have oats and wheat in all of our hazy IPAs, but we probably use less than a lot of other breweries do. Most of our recipes are somewhere around 9% oats, 9% wheat, and then probably half that, 4 or 5% chit malt. So for people who don't know, chit malt is essentially just under-modified German Pilsner malt. So they don't allow the shoots and the acrospire to grow quite as far. And so it's sort of like, I mean, it is malted, but it's not as malted as even sort of a standard German malt. It's honestly probably closer to what people were brewing with, 50 years ago or 100 years ago when step mashes and protein rests and all that were sort of the standard thing. But the advantage of it is particularly head retention and like the texture of the head. Even some beers with really good head retention, it's a very sort of light and airy and fluffy head. We find chit malt really gives you that like meringue, creamy, like really benefits the mouthfeel kind of head. I don't know how much it adds to the haze stability, but we seem to have really good haze stability. Anytime we'll often save a couple of 4-packs of a beer in the walk-in just in case somebody forgot to pick up their order or just a little QC. And even 3, 4, or 5 months down the line, our hazy IPAs are still pretty hazy. We don't get that sort of really milky, like very cloudy, super cloudy look, but all of ours are like medium plus haze. So we like chit for that. It's Best Malt is the maltster we get from. Wireman Carafoam is like relatively similar to that, different than something like Breeze Carapils, which is a crystal malt, but just a really low color crystal malt. The Carafoam and the chit malt it's like a protein head retention body thing rather than a dextrin or a complex carbohydrate thing. So it works for us. I know the local homebrew store by us, Maryland Homebrew, goes through it a lot faster than they used to since we started talking about it locally. It's definitely not like a magic bullet to make like, the best beer, the best hazy IPA you've ever had. But honestly, sadly, we haven't found that there's any one sort of thing that makes a magical difference. Making a great hazy IPA is like any other style, like little things, learning where to source the best ingredients, what works for your system, where you like the final gravity to be, what hops work for your palate in the whirlpool versus dry hopping, all those sorts of things.
And then, the secondary question to that is, would it be a good fit for other styles outside of hazies? Is there a place for it, somewhere else?
Yeah, we use it in most of our beers. I would say we do a pilsner occasionally that gets a bag of it. We'll add it to stouts. I don't think there's any beer that doesn't benefit from better head retention. A lot of our sours get it. I would issue the warning that you don't want to use too much of it. I just, for fun, wanted to see what would happen if I used 100% chit malt for a recipe, and I think my mash efficiency was like 41% or something like that. So too much of it, the starches are too bound up, and it really needs you can't do a single infusion mash.
My last question for that was kind of, maybe it's unique to that, and it may not fit, but I was curious what your thoughts on using the chit malt to increase body that would otherwise be lacking in low gravity beers, like 2 or 3% beers. Is that something, and it sounds like it's more for head retention than body probably. So that may have answered it earlier, but.
Yeah, it certainly can't hurt, and a little extra protein is never a bad thing in a low alcohol beer. I wish we could brew them more often. We did a beer 2 years ago called 3.8 Special. It was a Citra Amarillo 3.8% alcohol beer. Sadly, on a commercial scale, it's hard to make them viable because most of the cost of low gravity hoppy beer is the hops, and the average consumer coming in wants to pay half the price for a 3% beer that they would for a 6% beer, and sadly our costs are like 90%. As a home brewer, I did the non-enzymatic mashing thing. There's a little thing online, I think, that Breeze put together. Essentially, you mash all of the grain at room temperature or a little cooler than room temperature even. And that extracts mostly the proteins, the melanoidins, the flavor, the body, but very little fermentable sugar. And so again, your efficiency is going to be really low, but it prevents the beer from having that just like watered down, not enough base malt blandness that you can get when you go below about 3% alcohol. It's not a cost-effective method, but it really made a pretty good beer. I did like an ESB kind of thing. So I used as much grain as I would for normal, say 6% ESB, and I ended up at, I think it was about 2.3%, something like that. And obviously, like alcohol has a flavor. Alcohol is a great solubilizer of other compounds. So it's not going to completely taste like a stronger beer, but it's a pretty good start. And that's one of the great things about being a home brewer, is not having to worry too much about, spending extra $10 on a batch or something like that. That, if it's making a beer that you really enjoy, it's okay to sort of throw out most of the starches, or they advocate you can use those sort of stripped out grains that are still mostly starch, say in a double IPA or in a triple, where you might want to be, rather than adding simple sugars, or rather than adding a flavorless starch source, you can add these grains that have had their protein leached out, but still have fermentables waiting to be converted in the mash.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Next slide. So question number 2 comes from Ryan Metcalf, who is also a member of Lawrence Brewers Guild. In your February 2020 blog post, you asked the question, why don't brewers add 5 parts per million of metabisulfite as insurance for the hazy IPAs. Have you since actually tried that?
Yeah, so this was an article I wrote. Sadly, I don't update the blog nearly as often as I used to. I used to get in like 90 posts a year, and sadly now I think it's been more than a year since my last post. But I put together a post sort of. I started making a little bit of wine at home, although I haven't progressed much beyond sort of basic kits kind of things. But just sort of comparing the way brewers approach a problem and the way winemakers approach a problem. I mean, brewing is a really industrial thing, and so most of it is based around keeping oxygen out. You don't want to oxidize your beer. You purge your vessel with an inert gas like CO2 or nitrogen or argon or whatever. Before you transfer, you fill under pressure. You do everything you can to prevent contact between the beer and oxygen. Winemakers take this totally different approach because winemaking is a very agricultural kind of product, and was very much for a long time less science driven, let's say, than brewing. Brewers at Carlsberg were the ones who discovered or invented hydrometers and thermometers and all these sort of the first use of cell theory and microscopes and all of that was brewers and looking at yeast and all those sorts of things. But so the sort of winemaker's approach is just you let oxygen contact happen and you add an antioxidant, metabisulfite, sort of most commonly. And it was really just sort of discussing like why that isn't a thing that people who are brewers do. Part of that is a legal thing. For wine, there are higher level of sulfites just sort of naturally in grapes. Beer does, through fermentation, generate sulfites. I know Brewosophy has done some experiments with it and found pretty clear differences. We've sort of experimented with it on a small scale, and luckily for us, it doesn't seem like we need that. We've got sort of really low oxygen fill levels. When we get our beers tested, usually the total package oxygen is under 20 or 30 parts per billion oxygen. Sulfites can cause allergic reactions, asthma symptoms in some people. So it's something that if we can avoid, we like to. We have a couple experiments going where we've added it to barrels of stout, just because that's a time when there's really no avoiding some oxygen contact. And we're hoping that honestly at that 5 ppm level, that is like 1/20th or 1/30th of what sort of a common wine dosage is. And because we're still purging the barrel with CO2 and putting the beer in there, there really shouldn't be much sulfite left in there. Once sulfites contact oxygen, they turn into sulfates. So the same thing you get from gypsum, and 4 or 5 parts per million of sulfate really isn't going to change the character of your beer at all. One of the big sort of drawbacks, or whatever you want to phrase it, sulfites are more effective if the pH is lower. And so if you make wine, you can look at these charts where it says, to ensure that your sulfites are also anti-fungal and anti-yeast. The lower your pH is, the less sulfite you need to add. In beer, you're probably not looking to do that. I played around a little with that at home, doing a historic English imperial stout where I dosed in a high level, like 1 Campton tablet per gallon, to stop the Brettanomyces from continuing to attenuate when it got to the right level of flavor or the right level of attenuation. That worked pretty well. And honestly, that beer held up for like 10 years. So I'm sure the sulfite dose was at least part of that. But because beer tends to be a higher pH, more of the sulfites are going to be in a bound state. So sulfites, it's a equilibrium reaction where the free sulfur dioxide is what is actually doing the antioxidant thing or the antimicrobial thing. And the lower the pH, the higher the ratio of free SO2 to the sort of the bound sulfite. And that's good in the sense that it means that the sulfites will sort of stick around and be available long term for antioxidant, as a little bit of oxygen seeps in through the crown cap liner or that sort of thing. But it also means that it is not as rapid or active. What some brewers do is to combine ascorbic acid with sulfite. My understanding, again, this is not an area where I may serve expert, you never want to use ascorbic acid on its own. It is an antioxidant, but it doesn't sort of permanently bind up the oxygen. And so it just sort of ends up being this free radical thing, but it's very quick. And so what some people do is ascorbic acid to be sort of the quick acting antioxidant, and then along with metabisulfite, which will then reduce the ascorbic acid and result in a more stable long-term product. Ascorbic acid, I believe, is just vitamin C, and so it's like that's a lot less scary of a chemical to add, but on its own, it's not particularly effective.
Cool. Which is really neat that you got to absorbic acid. We had a live question come in as you were talking, and from Kirk Tiedemann. He's with Missouri Mashers. He asks, along these same lines, have you experimented with absorbic acid as an antioxidant in your beers?
So I should say I honestly don't remember who told me that. I've never actually tried adding it, but that was sort of the like, it was I'm sure it was some brewer whose opinion I respected, but yeah, that was sort of the answer, was that on its own it's not a great option, but in combination with metabisulfite it can be a good tool.
All right, ready for the next question.
Sure.
So question 3 is from Stephanie Butler from Kansas City Beer Meisters. She asks, what is the best method or time to add the metabisulfite when using a closed transfer method from fermenter to keg?
So anything like that, I always find it easier to probably add it to the receiving keg before you purge whatever you're doing to remove as much oxygen as possible. Better not to open it up afterwards and try to get it in. On a big scale, anytime we're trying to add something, we usually use a keg. So if we're adding finings like biofine to a fermenter, we'll generally either, if it's a really small amount, we'll just, again, this is depending on what your setup is, a home brewer, you'd have to have a pretty sweet setup. We'll just put like an elbow and then a sight glass, and we'll fill that tube and just hook up to CO2 and push into the tank whatever we're trying to get into the tank. If we're, say, dosing, yeah, like I'm trying to think what else we do like that. We do biofine like that. We'll do, we just made our first hard seltzer, and so we're adding like potassium bicarbonate to raise the pH to help ensure good fermentation by the yeast. We did that. If we're adding, like sometimes we'll add a little acid to adjust something, or a little final dose of a salt or something like that. But honestly, much easier just to have it in the receiving vessel. Usually most of the oxygen pickup and any kind of transfer is that turbulent time where you're splashing or where there's gas liquid mixture. And so getting it in there as early as possible is beneficial. You would definitely want to wait until after sort of primary fermentation was done, because yeast does a great job scavenging oxygen on its own, and it needs oxygen at the start. So you don't want to, like put a bunch of sulfite in there and then try to aerate it, because you're either going to stop that oxygen from being available for the yeast, or you're going to and or use up all the sulfite sort of protective ability.
Next slide. So this next question is from Jake Jeffers. He's also a member of Lawrence Brewers Guild. When using the 3-headed pitch, do you oxygenate your wort?
So I think he's referring to, in American sour beers, I talk about when making sort of a long-term mixed fermentation sour, I'll generally, as a homebrewer, would add sort of part 1 is like some sort of generally brewer's yeast, could be a wine yeast, could be honestly any yeast that you think will, go to work quickly, get you a few % of alcohol, and like ensure that beer is like safe. Part 2 is generally some sort of commercial culture, just to make sure you have like, there's some Brettanomyces and there's some Lactobacillus, there's some Pediococcus or whatever you're looking for, and then bottle dregs. And the answer is, yeah, I always have treated those sours as sort of I normally would. Aerate, nutrients, whatever you'd normally do for a good healthy fermentation, that's what I would do for a sour beer. I think the sort of like intentionally stressing the culture thing is something that I don't do until I really get to know a yeast. I find most yeast are expressive enough for my tastes without having to underpitch them, manipulate the aeration to change the amount of ester production they do. I really like my Hefeweizens fermented cold so that the banana is a nice component and not, make it smell like a banana sundae that's, been sitting around for 3 weeks or whatever it is. And that if you want more banana, I'd be more apt to suggest finding a different Hefeweizen strain that pushed that banana ester more rather than pitching at 75 degrees and letting it ramp up to 80 degrees or something like that. At the brewery, we will just sort of generally use whatever kind of yeast we have on hand. We're doing a pale sour tomorrow that we're using 71B wine yeast. I don't know why it's like this, but wine yeast is so much less expensive than brewer's yeast. And we buy a lot of bricks of wine yeast for 45 or 50 bucks for a half kilo, which is enough for 200 gallons of beer. But the brewer's yeast, a lot of them are like 150 or 200 bucks for the same amount. I don't know why that's the case, but that sort of seems to be the case now. I like wine yeast in general for primary fermentation on sour beers. They tend to not be very aggressive fermenters in terms of maltotriose and the more complex sugars, so they leave a lot behind for the bugs. A lot of them are very mouthfeel positive and they have fun interactions, and it's a really sort of interesting option that's out there. And honestly, I really appreciate a lot of the wine yeast labs are like very upfront, like, hey, like this strain makes a lot of whatever enzyme that frees grape thiols, or it makes a lot of glycerin. And a lot of brewers yeast companies are very sort of locked down on what their strains they've done genetic testing and they know what they can do, but they're not really willing to share it very openly. We have, as our barrel program has sort of grown, we've got, I think, 65 or 70 sour barrels now. We have shied away more and more from using commercial cultures, and we've been a lot happier. So like what we were doing this afternoon, my brewer Ken and I went over to the barrel warehouse, and I've got this big spreadsheet of all our barrels, and we just started tasting through barrels that were about 6 months old. And we found a couple that we really liked, and we brought some samples over to Scott, and we all kind of sat down and discussed, hey, I like this flavor on this one, the acidity's better on that one. And tomorrow I'm going to go in, and while Ken's mashing in, I'm going to be jumping 5 gallons of beer out of one of the barrels, and that's going to be part of the starter that will go in with the new 10 barrel, 330 gallon batch, whatever it is. And we've just found that we are happier with the consistency of the souring, with the flavors we're getting compared to when we were buying commercial pitches that were just like, sometimes they'd hit and sometimes they wouldn't. I think a lot of commercial cultures are a little maybe wimpy. And if you hop it a little bit too much, or you don't give it, you don't really baby it, it's just sort of not going to have the sort of impact that I hope for. And so that would be my sort of tip if you were like really serious and you love sours, is like start out with a bunch of them, start out with different cultures, different bottle dregs, different cultures that sound good. But then from there, either save a little bit and pitch that into a new batch, or at the very least, you could use your own bottle dregs even, as some way to like get it, play it forward. And we can talk about the mad fermentation of Saison blend a little bit, but that's sort of how I did that one. It was just repitched and repitched and repitched until eventually I sent to bootleg biology.
Okay, question 5. This is for me again. Will Brettanomyces continue to produce esters and flavors beyond a stable gravity of 1.0 if given enough time?
Yeah, so I'd say yes, with sort of the caveat that probably not as much the esters. So esters are primarily a byproduct of alcoholic fermentation. And so this is why when you do a 100% Brettanomyces fermentation, I've done IPAs. Crooked Stave did a lot of those originally. You tend to get a lot more of the fruity character of the fermentation. That's where you tend to get like pineapple and tropical esters and those sorts of things. So if you want to sort of push the fruity character of a Brett beer, try to get it in as early as possible and as strong and healthy a culture as possible to really force it to produce esters. That said, Brettanomyces can continue to do things with phenols, which tend to be the funkier flavors. So Brett can metabolize 4-VG, which is like the clove that you usually get in like a Hefeweizen, into 4-EG, so 4-ethyl glycol, which is like a funkier. It's the more sort of a too high concentration that it can get sort of that medicinal smoky whatever, but at lighter levels it's barnyard or farmyard or whatever it is. That stuff keeps happening. Brett will also work on glycosides, which are bound compounds from hops or spices or fruit. Glycosides are really interesting. When essentially a plant needs to move a non-water soluble molecule around, so it might be producing something in the roots, it wants to send it to the leaves because it's a anti-insecticide, whatever. It will stick a sugar molecule on it because sugar is so hydrophilic, it loves water. It can then send it up through the xylem to the leaves. And once it's there, it sort of has that molecular key, and it takes the sugar off, so it can use it for energy or whatever it needs, and then it has that free molecule. And so the great thing about these molecules is that they are water soluble. So if you're adding hops to the boil, or you're adding even dry hopping or adding fruit in, a lot of these compounds get into your wort or into your beer, but without something to sort of crack that lock, they just stay sort of inert. You're not going to smell them. You're not going to taste them. So Brettanomyces does have this ability. Very few Saccharomyces species do, but a lot of Brett does. And so that's like a really fun thing that we'll keep doing and keep working on. It will do a little fermentation, things like wood sugars, cellobiose, or I can't remember what, there's a sugar when Saccharomyces italicizes when it dies, it rips its cells open, a little bit of sugar comes out that the Brett can ferment. I really like the character of Brett fermenting under pressure in a bottle or a keg. I'm a big believer in bottle conditioning, mixed ferment sour beers, even if and we often do, pitch a little wine yeast just to ensure we get to carbonation that we're looking for, letting that Brett continue to work warm. If you want to store a non-sour beer, I would always suggest the colder the better. From an IPA to a stout, they will age more gracefully if they're kept cold. It slows oxidation. But for sour beer, I would strongly, if it's bottle conditioned, I'd want to leave it warm enough in the 50s at a minimum, maybe 60s is better, where Brettanomyces will keep working, because if oxygen gets into the bottle or hop compounds break down, they release oxygen, you'll end up with the Brett taking up that oxygen because it makes its metabolism so much more effective, and protecting the beer. They've found Brett strains alive in 20, 30, 40-year-old bottles of beer. We got a really fun Brett strain from a French sort of semi-professional microbe hunter named Christopher Pinchon, who's active on Milk the Funk, which is a great Facebook group and great podcast and whatever else they do, wiki. that he had gotten out of a bottle. I think it was like a 1991 or 1992 Berliner Weiss from Wilner Brewing. And so it's really cool. They have like, I mean, very few real Berliner Weisses exist anymore. There are a couple of revivalists who have opened up new breweries that use Brettanomyces, and that was like a real part of the Berliner style. Like kettle souring and whatever is all a very like modern, controlled version of what Berliner Weiss was for hundreds of years. And so it's very cool to like use, like a little piece of, it's not quite archaeology like some of the shipwreck yeast or whatever, but it was really cool. The beer was like, if you liked it, it was sort of like a lemon poppy kind of thing. If you didn't like it, it maybe came off a little more like dill pickly. Yeah, Brettanomyces is wonderful and fascinating. And we do kettle sours and we use Philly sour and some stuff like that, but there's just no replacing a real mixed fermentation for me.
Awesome. Next question is from Matt Bechtold, also a Lawrence Brewers Guild member. Do you have any special practices or techniques for speeding the degradation of THP in packaged sour beer?
Sure, and actually, I'm reading ahead in that the next part of the question I think is the entire key, and how would you go about reducing its existence in the first place? And that's really is the most important bit. So for those who don't know, THP is tetrahydropyridine, and it's odd. I think a lot of people, there's always that debate: what's an off flavor and what's a feature? There are people who say saison or a Czech Pilsner in a green bottle. The green bottle skunk flavor is a part of the style. That is a feature, not a defect. And when we've had our club members, we have a bottle club, and sort of as one of the benefits, once a year, they get to come in and taste some single barrels and say, vote, hey, we want a club beer and we want this barrel with mangoes, or we want that barrel blended with this barrel. We want this barrel dry hopped with that hop. And we've given them some barrels with a little THP, and they've liked it. Those barrels often win. And so THP, you'll get it sometimes in kettle sours or like young pale sours. And to me, this way everyone, it's one of those flavors that people sort of experience differently. I get it as like a lingering, like Cheerio or flaked wheat sort of flavor. So it's like that retro olfactory after you swallow, and you get this like maltier than it should be, and then but like it's just sort of like hangs around. If people really dislike it, mousy or mouse urine is sort of the most common descriptor for it. It is, my understanding is oxygen related, and so minimizing oxygen contact. And so as a home brewer, if it really bothered you and you like wanted to not deal with it, I would suggest, say, getting like a Blickman beer gun or something like that, and doing your bottling rather than from a bottling bucket, from a keg. So having the ability to purge the bottle, fill the bottle, and then cap the bottle. You could mix in, if you're priming and re-yeasting a sour beer, you could mix that all into the keg, transfer the beer on top of it. And that's essentially what we do at the brewery. We have a counter-pressure four-head filler. We have a blending tank, so we go from the barrels into the blending tank. We add yeast and sugar. We mix it up. And then we fill with a 10-second CO2 purge, and then a fill under pressure, and then hand it over to somebody else and they cap it. I would say sort of like number two in terms of like don't let the beer touch oxygen if you can avoid it. And then number two is pitch yeast at packaging that will quickly consume the oxygen before Brettanomyces can get to it. And so I think that's sort of what's happening is and honestly, I do not know if it is that bread is producing the THP when it gets oxygen, or if it's that there are already compounds in the beer, they're then oxidized into THP. but we rehydrate just like cheap champagne yeast for the most part. We use Premier Cuvée or EC 1118, something that is just like acid tolerant, alcohol tolerant, a fast fermenter. We rehydrate it with a Go Firm or Startup, one of these rehydration nutrients. We go a little bit lower than the recommended rate just because a little too much and you can taste those B vitamins. I'm very careful with the yeast. Again, it may not be worth it on a small scale, on a big scale. So I'll put the, half a gallon or whatever it is of rehydrated yeast after it's cooled down a little bit. And then I'll hook it up to the tank and slowly fill beer back into it for say half an hour. Just giving that yeast time to acclimate to the acidity, the alcohol, the temperature change, and then I'll shoot it all back in. So, like tempering an egg or something like that, you mix in a little, mix in a little, mix in a little, dump it back. And we have not had really any THP issues. Occasionally we'll have a barrel that has a little bit. Once in a while we'll have a bottle that has it for, maybe a week or something like that. My only method at home of dealing with THP was just to budget in 3 or 4 months sometimes for it to go away. So warm conditioning, I assume the Brettanomyces as it works is reuptaking that oxygen, using it, something like that. But I never had a great sort of, again, magic silver bullet for it. I mean, it's the kind of thing you might want to consider a very tiny amount of metabisulfite, again, help to pick up that oxygen. Again, it takes 50, 60, 70 ppm to kill any sort of yeast. Wine yeast in particular has evolved to be a little bit more tolerant of sulfites because they're in winemaking use and naturally in wine. So rehydrating and using a wine yeast is good insurance if you do want to add a little bit of sulfite. Yeah, it's an oxygen thing as far as I'm aware.
Cool. This question is from Jake Jeffers. As a home brewer, have you generally boiled your wort prior to kettle souring?
I'm trying to remember. I did not do a huge number of kettle sours at home. Usually, I would pasteurize first. Is my general approach, just because. My general kettle souring process would be mash like normal, run off, heat up hot enough, 170 or 180, that you're confident that you have killed anything that's sort of wild from the grain in the kettle, anything like that. Cool it back down to about, again, depends on your lacto strain, but around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm a big advocate of making a starter for the lactobacillus. Lacto can double every 20 or 30 minutes. So it's one of those stupid, sort of math problems. If it goes, start with 1 cell at time 0, at 24 hours, it would be 700 quadrillion, whatever it is, some ridiculous number that's probably bigger than the Earth. So you don't really need a huge number of cells. What you're really interested in is making sure that lacto is viable. So even again at the brewery, I've talked to brewers who will buy a $300 or $400 or $500 pitch of lactobacillus. We buy a little Omega Labs, $8 or $9 thing, and the day before making kettle sour, we will just step it up in a gallon or 2 gallons of wort, like that, 10, 20, nothing special, no oxygen or anything like that. So like making sure that like you have viable, happy, enthusiastic lactobacillus. So we'll bring up the boil, bring down, pitch it. We run in a little CO2. I really don't think it's that necessary. A lot of the issues with oxygen exposure are more the other microbes. We'll also, at the same time we pitch our lacto, I forgot, we will add some lactic acid, get that pH down, help to inhibit some protein breakdown, help to inhibit, if there's any spoilage microbes in there or particularly pathogenic. And then we tend to boil after. You can kind of go either way. If the souring is clean, it really doesn't matter. Doing it after just makes me feel better because then I'm making sure all the DMS is out of there. I'm chasing away if there are any kind of weird aromatics. Um, Lactobacillus, if you have pure lactose, should make very little CO2 and very little alcohol. I would be a little worried about boiling, say if there was like a real hearty active fermentation going on, you're volatilizing a lot of alcohol. That may not be great for you or your propane burner or whatever it is. If that were to light on fire, but again, if you're seeing real active fermentation, you've got yeast in there and there's something wrong. Yeah, I don't think it really matters that much. The only time I think I would sort of do it the opposite at home, if I was doing like a hoppy kettle sour, where I wanted to do like a low temperature whirlpool with the hops, I would tend to probably boil first, sour, and then bring up to 180 to pasteurize. At the same time, add like a low temperature whirlpool addition. So I'm not getting too much bitterness, but I'm still getting some kettle hop flavor. We're doing our first big batch with Philly sour right now, which is something thermotolerance. It's one of these lactic acid producing yeasts. And the nice thing about those is there's no waiting around for it. There's no timing the sourness. It's a little less control just because it is going to get as sour as it wants to, and there's really nothing you can do to stop it. You can sort of pull the levers a little bit. If you add simple sugars, if you add some glucose, it'll make more acid. If you ferment it hotter, I think it gets a little more sour a little more quickly, although I'm not sure about that. Apparently they keep bumping up the suggested fermentation temperature. We initially pitched, I think, at 68, ramped up to 72. And honestly, it really didn't get rocky until we bumped it again to 74 or 75. So honestly, I would think, yeah, boil before or after, doesn't matter.
Another question for me. What is the quickest turnaround from grain to glass that you have attempted for like a legit sour beer, like not a kettle sour?
Yeah, so we do, and honestly, the only reason we're really doing kettle sours now is we have a mobile canning company that comes in, and we finally talked them into Philly sour, but they can't do Brett or Lacto or anything like that. Before that, we really didn't do any kettle sours. And so what we do for sort of our like quick mix fermentations, so we do a Berliner Weiss called Little by Slowly. We do a Goza called Salzig. We do some sort of mixed ferment saisons. It depends exactly on what we're doing, but in a lot of cases, we will make the wort as normal. If we're doing the Berliner Weiss, we don't boil. We just bring it up to about 175 or 180 pretty quickly to pasteurize and then crash it. I like that sort of, it's like this doughy, raw grain kind of thing you get from no boil. I like it in Berliner Weisses because Berliner Weiss is a relatively bland style. I know some people do like no boil, like New England double IPAs. I find that grain flavor distracting with hops, but that's sort of beside the point. We knock out, and if we want it to be pretty sour, what we'll usually do is we'll knock out at 95 degrees, pitch our lactose starter, and let it go for 12 hours or so, really let that lacto get rocking, and then start cooling it down. So we'll get down to whatever temperature we want to ferment at. So if it's a saison yeast, we might only knock it down to 75 degrees. If it's, let's say, American ale yeast, which I like in a Berliner Weiss or a Goza, we'll go down to the 65 or so, 65 to 68. We might pitch Brettanomyces at that same time, depending on exactly what we're going for, and then we'll just let it finish out. Usually with that kind of beer, I will mash pretty cool. I'll mash at 148 or so, because I don't want more carbonation after I package it. So I'm looking to get it as dry as it's going to get quickly so I can get it into a keg. What we do at the brewery, or pretty much sort of what I do at home, is it's safer at the brewery. We put it into kegs. So we'll keg it and we'll leave a little bit of headspace. And then we'll usually give it like a month just to sort of like hang out in the keg, Brett do a little bit of its thing, and then we'll start serving them. And we'll leave most of the kegs warm, and we'll slowly, we'll pull in sort of a backup, hook it up to gas while one's on. The one that was on gas for a week gets, put on tap. Another one gets pulled in. And it's really fun for us because it's kind of like bottle conditioning or something like that, where the beer will continue to change over the next couple of months. And regulars have really enjoyed sort of getting to try it when it first gets tapped, when it's relatively clean and relatively, you know, bright and lemony or whatever. And then as time goes on, it gets, you know, funkier and more interesting. So in a lot of cases, those beers are probably on tap at 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. I often would prefer to give them more time. We're for Bear Whistle backed up on sour beers at the moment. We did Argoza, but then we did some of it on guava, which is always been a favorite combination of ours. But so the fruit one's on first, and so now the Salzig, the Goza sing behind it. And we did for the first time mixed ferment Belgian wit. So we used our Saison culture with Brett and lacto and whatever. One thing that we'll often do if the beer gets sour enough, so say 3 days into fermentation, the pH is already down to 3.4, and that's as sour as we want it. Dry hops will stop lactobacillus from acidifying. We'll also use either hexalone or tetralone. So tetralone it's a reduced hop pre-isomerized. That was, I believe, invented by Miller Brewing, so they could have clear bottles for Miller High Life without getting skunked. But it is head positive, mouthfeel positive, and it can be dosed at a pretty low rate and stop lacto. We were just talking to a hop scientist, John Paul May, who Scott's friendly with, and he said that there's also now alpha acid extracts that might even be better, that they're more toxic to lacto at lower rates and have good head positive sort of aspects too. So there are a lot of interesting options out there, or honestly, just like an ounce of dry hops will pretty much stop the lacto in its tracks. The lower the pH is, the more toxic hop compounds are to lactobacillus. So it doesn't take much hopping once the pH is low to stop lacto.
Next question is from Matt Bechtold. Have you or will you be doing any, and I'm not sure I'm saying this right, but Méthode Traditionnelle, which is a lambic production at Sapwood?
Yeah, so we are definitely not set up and not intending to be set up to do the full cool ship turbid mash thing. We dance around lambic-y style beers, or so we don't call them this officially, but they're sort of the code word and everything, as we call them, because we're in Maryland, Marylambic or Marylambic. I know people are very touchy about those words, which I find a little funny because in Europe, like Kolsch has a much stronger protection than lambic. Kolsch has to be made near Cologne within 30 kilometers or whatever. Lambic is just essentially that it has some wheat and spontaneous fermentations involved. And there's the Oda ones are the ones, so like Oda Creek and Oda Goose are the ones that have more, that have to be 100% spontaneous fermentation, but there's no regional significance to them. You don't have to be in the Seine Valley or anything like that, according to the EU. But for some reason in America, people have no problem making a Kolsch or making a New England Pale Ale or making a Russian Imperial Stout. But lambic is a very sort of touchy area. I have a huge amount of respect for the American brewers who are willing to put so much beer and so much time into spinning up a real spontaneous fermentation. When I talked to Jason Perkins and Rob Todd at Allagash for American Sour Beers, I think at that point they were still dumping about 2/3 of the barrels of their Cool Ship beer. That is like remarkable that a brewery can stomach that. You have to be a brewery that has some sort of financing. In their case, it's Allagash White, is sort of the big beer that pays the bills, and then the sort of the other stuff is the more fun stuff. And obviously from the beers I've had from them, it was worth the effort. It took them time to dial in their hopping rate and the time of year and all those things. As a home brewer and now as a commercial brewer, I can't stomach that. So what we do is It's the same idea at home. We do wild captures. So we'll leave a little bit of wort out overnight with some cheesecloth over it or with some sort of lid on it just to prevent, a deer from trying to drink it or whatever. We'll grow those up in a little bottle with a stopper and an airlock. And then we'll usually step them up into a growler. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, we'll do some sensory. We'll take a look at them. Are they covered in mold? Throw it out. Does it smell like nail polish remover? Throw it out. Does it smell like something that would make you sick? Don't try it. And after we smell them and look at them, we'll do some pH tests. We'll so far we've done sort of a clean primary fermentation. Then each barrel will get like a different culture or a blend of cultures. Depending on which one's got a good pH drop or which ones smell good. And my hope is that we have some real winners from that process and then can take some of the beer from that and transfer it into other barrels and sort of, seed saver style kind of have our own local culture. And honestly, that's very much what Belgian lambic breweries do. They do not have sterile wort going into the cool ship and then putting it into pristinely clean first use barrels that don't have any microbes. When they have a new barrel, they'll often seed it with some of a favorite barrel or from a culture that they've kept going in a tank or something. It's not quite as romantic as it may seem. When there's some interesting studies out there on +1 where someone took Cantillon wort at various stages. There's a lot of lager yeast at Cantillon, and the old lager yeast is not something that's in nature. And it's almost certainly that as a brewery, they bought a lot of old Pilsner barrels, and those barrels came with Saccharomyces, whatever we're calling it now, Pastorianus or Uvarum. And so that is now, I'm sure it's been now hybridized with other wild yeasts and things like that, but it's not it's not just things that floated in on the breeze that are in the barrels. Brettanomyces is generally not airborne unless it is being volatilized into the air by a spraying fermentation or something. It almost certainly came in on the barrels because new oak barrels often have Brettanomyces because there's wild yeast in trees and it often it likes wood sugars. And so just the idea that you could take perfectly sanitary wort out of your kettle, put into a cool ship with wild air blowing over it, and have a high success rate is not great. It really takes some time and probably some luck that there are things being hybridized that from the blow off that you had that's spraying yeast all over your brewery. Those yeast become endemic to your brewery and get hybridized, and then hey, this is a wild yeast gene that codes for a fun flavor, but it's also got that alcohol tolerant, maltose fermenting, yada yada that the brewer's yeast kind of brought to the table when it went through reproduction. All that is to say, my goal is I'm more interested in making really delicious beer than I am in the process that goes into it. I would rather pitch microbes and have a beer that was delicious rather than have a good story about driving my wort out somewhere if that beer was borderline undrinkable. Obviously, the best is both that you have, and so for us, it's things like we love foraged beers. So I've gone out to pick sumac and wine berries, and we grow a lot of herbs, and we those sorts of things I think are a better expression of our local environment maybe than the wild yeast. But again, it's something that's very tricky to do on a small scale. You need a lot of barrels or a lot of carboys and a lot of time and a lot of patience and the willingness to dump a lot of product before you figure things out and or happen to capture the right microbes.
Our next question is from Tucker Craig. He is a member of Lawrence Brewers Guild, and he's also the head brewer of 23rd Street Brewery here in Lawrence. He asks, have you experimented with the Philly sour yeast that produces both lactic acid and ethanol? And if so, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple years ago, Matt Bachman from Wild Pitch Yeast, I was talking to him for something, and he sent me some samples of Wickerhamomyces anomalus and a Hanseospora vinea. And so that was the first time I had ever sort of heard of these lactic acid yeast. I tried them at home in a couple of test batches, and I chatted a little bit with a professor in Philadelphia who had a strain. I tried to talk him into giving me some of it, and he said that no, that he was trying to get a yeast lab to buy it off him. And that apparently he eventually did, because Lawman now has Philly Sour. I think they are a better substitute for kettle souring than anything else. I have yet to have one where I felt that the fermentation character above and beyond alcohol and lactic acid, I haven't had one yet that like really had a great or an interesting flavor on its own. I think just like a kettle sour, you want to make something else the star. It could be a fun malt profile. It could be a cool hop aroma. It could be fruit. It could be spicy. It could be some combination of those things. I don't think it's going to make, say, like a great Berliner Weiss compared to, I guess that's where I differ. Like, to me, Berliner Weiss and Gose are like my last choices for kettle souring if they're plain, because they have so little else going on. I tend to kettle sour heavily fruited beers for the most part. And sort of the same thing with something like Philly Sour. I don't love the price point, at least on a commercial scale. It costs us more than a lot of liquid yeast. And the guy from Sweet Generous, the homebrew blog, did a great write-up on, I guess they very much pushed that you couldn't repitch it. It turns out that just the cells are really small, and as long as you're pitching the right number of cells, it sours perfectly fine. But you can't just sort of repitch it by volume like it was brewer's yeast or something like that. Yeah, we did a couple test batches with it that were pretty good. It's really convenient. I mean, it's annoying to do kettle sours, particularly now that we double batch, and either you got kettle sour 2 or try to get one really, really sour. You run into, at our scale, production delays where, we were planning on finishing up the beer after 24 hours. It needs another 24 hours, which bumps another brew day or that kind of thing. And as a home brewer, if you start your kettle sour on Saturday morning, it's not ready to go by Sunday night, and you need to go into work on Monday morning. Either you have to, call it early, or, call in sick or whatever. Not that I'm advocating that. But yeah, I think they're promising, and I'm really looking forward to sort of, more people experimenting with these strains. I like Philly Sour more than Cerevisiae. Cerevisiae is just a sac strain where they spliced in, I don't know if it was CRISPR-Cas9 or something else. They added a lactic acid producing gene. It's much more aggressive. So Cerevisiae, I'm not even sure they sell homebrew pitches of that yet, but it will get your pH pretty close to 3. Whereas Philly Sour, ours got down to about 3.3, and that's sort of the low end. It's often more like 3.4 or 3.5. So yeah, worth trying, but also, not, it's not going to replace, barrel aged sour beer in my heart.
Before we move on to the next question, really, Jake asked if, and I'm going to butcher this completely, but he asked if you have used Meganakauia rucafi.
Rucafi. You almost nailed it.
Thank you, Jake.
We call it Rafiki. I don't. Yeah, so we one of our good friends from Homebrew Club days, Rob Fink, was the brewer at Jailbreak Brewing, not too far from us in Laurel, Maryland, and he actually just got promoted to be head brewer at Fairwinds down in Virginia. And we did a collab with them last year called Sisyphean Task. And it was essentially Rob's take on a whole bunch of stuff that Scott had sort of dug up research on, but we hadn't actually sort of put into action. And one of those was getting, I'm not even going to try to say the real name of the The Yeast Bay sells it. And it is a specialty nectar fermenting, I believe it's a yeast. And sort of I think the idea is it's supposed to be synergistic with the flowers, that it's eating some of the nectar, but it's helping to express the aromatics from it that are helping to then attract the pollinators. It was a little tricky. We used it in a couple of test batches and we're not sort of wowed by it. We got sort of like a green apple thing that wasn't great. On the big batch, though, it seemed to work well, but we also threw some enzymes at the beer in the fermenter that free hop compounds, and we did early dry hopping and late dry hopping and all sorts of stuff. So I'll say I wasn't impressed by it enough on its own that we haven't done anything else with it since, but it definitely seems to have some promise, probably with the right hops and the right combination of things. We're trying a lot of these sort of things. It's tricky because you might get a beer that's a little more interesting before dry hopping it, but once it's dry hopped at a heavy rate, and where a lot of our beers are the equivalent of close to a pound in 5 gallons, that just sort of blows up most of the subtle yeasty interaction kind of stuff. We have been playing around with Berkeley yeast and Omega are both doing some really interesting hybrids and or genetically modified strains where they're adding genes from the winemaking world that free thiols and do all sorts of interesting things. And I think Scott at some point just said it's like learning how to brew all over again. You just don't know what flavors are going to come out of a particular hop with a particular, fermentation interaction. And it really is like, getting back and trying to figure out and learn. And for us, it's, we have a little 15-gallon fermenter and we'll pull off 15 gallons of wort anytime it's open and pitch some sort of interesting yeast that we've got our hands on. And sometimes it's like, wow, that really tastes like grapefruit juice. That's crazy. And sometimes it's like, well, that doesn't really, that's, it's bland or it has a weird sulfur thing or whatever. So sadly, I don't have enough anecdotal evidence about Rocafe, whatever it is, to like give you any real advice other than to say like, that's what we need homebrewers for. It's like people to like really drill down on something and like figure out what it's good for and share it with other people. Because that's really what beer needs, is like sharing information, because no one person can kind of figure everything out themselves. And we try to do as much sharing as we can, and really appreciate other brewers who take the time to like write up and share their experiences with a new product or new yeast or new anything.
Awesome. Yeah, Jake and I are going to experiment with that, I think, this weekend. So we'll report back.
Yeah, I think you have to co-ferment it. It's a very low attenuator on its own, is the only thing I'd say. I don't know. We co-pitched, but I don't know if there's any benefit to staggering or anything like that.
So next question is from Patrick Brown from the Kansas City Beer Meisters. He asks, have you done any further experimentation with mixed fermentation cider? And if so, do you have any tips on fermentation temperature?
Yeah, so about a year ago, we got our federal low alcohol winemaking license, and we now use usually the Mad Fermentationist Saison blend is sort of our house cider culture. It does not get super acidic or super funky, but it does add like an extra depth or like nuance to the cider. As I was saying earlier, sort of most of the funkiness in sour beers comes from 4VG, which gets converted. So that all starts as ferulic acid. And apples do not have nearly as much ferulic acid as barley or particularly wheat. It's a lot free. And so it really doesn't matter how much Brett you add to a cider. It's never going to have that like big horse blanket, funky, thing that like or an Orval or a Saison Brett or some sort of cidery apples, but probably not enough to give us the acid and the tans we're looking for. So we played around with like pre-pitching lactobacillus to get that pH down a little bit. That can work pretty well. I like a little more acid in my ciders than just sort of the sweet drinking apple kind of thing. We bottle condition them, but yeah, like even after 6 months in the bottle, they're not that funky. I don't know that we want them to be that funky, honestly. We're trying to barrel age some mixed ferment ciders right now with some additional microbes. But yeah, honestly, like it works out pretty well. We just ferment at ambient. We get the cider in big IBC totes, and we just ferment in the tote because they don't produce much krausen. Honestly, I don't know that we've ever done a great job testing the temperature during fermentation. We just sort of assume it's Saison yeast and it likes it warm. And if it's 75 degrees ambient, it might be 90 degrees in the middle of that while it's really cranking. Yeah, I wish I knew more about cider making, but for us, for the most part, it's more of a side experimental thing that also like allows us to have something that isn't beer if you want something gluten-free or relatively dry, or you wish you could be drinking a wine. And so we haven't done enough of it to really sort of dial anything in other than it seems to work with we get gluten-free pitch grown on sorghum from Bootleg Biology to keep it gluten-free, and then we sort of go from there. But yeah, I would say fermented at sort of similar temperatures that you would a beer, that there isn't anything too different about cider compared to beer in that respect.
Before we move to the next question, kind of on that note of the gluten-free, have you used Clarity Firm, or do you guys use Clarity Firm in any of your beers, Sapwood, for gluten reduction for people, or
Yeah.
for chill haze even?
Yeah, no, we use it for both. We don't add to all our beers. Scott and I sort of debated. We have added it to hazy IPAs before, and really has not affected the haze that we get in those. The haze from a hazy IPA is it's like polyphenol and protein, and there's just so much of those in there that you're not going to get a clear beer. We'll add findings to some of our beers to help drop out yeast and hop particulate and stuff like that. And we've never had issues with the beers. Well, I should say, without other extenuating factors. We had a couple of batches where the attenuation stopped pretty higher than we wanted, and we pitched like US-05 to finish out fermentation, and that plus Biofine or something like that has cleared up some hazy IPAs to the great disappointment of some of our local drinkers. But in general, Clarity Firm and Biofine don't cause trouble for that. We don't advertise it too much because we haven't gotten the beers tested, and I always am nervous about telling someone who has any sort of medical condition that this thing is safe for you to drink, when probably the safest thing would be the cider or the seltzer or whatever. We probably should send it in to get tested at some point. They have cracked down a little bit on the freezing you're allowed to do. Now you have to say, we probably have it on our website. It's like crafted to reduce the amount of something like that. You can't say gluten-free or anything like that unless it is brewed from ingredients that are entirely gluten-free. And now they're even saying that you have to get like statements from any suppliers to ensure that they didn't introduce any gluten. Enzymatically treated to remove gluten or reduce gluten is the sort of the standard phrasing now. But yeah, we added to like pilsners and lagers and things like that. No matter what we do, we don't filter any of our beers. They never end up like super clear, but at least they don't look like hazy IPAs. That's about as good as we can hope for at this point.
Awesome. Next slide. Oh wait, we're here. Okay. So this question is for me, and it's kind of a general question, I guess. For those who have not yet read your book, what bit of encouragement or motivation can you give for those that are hesitant or nervous to get started with sour beers due to sanitation or timing concerns? And I put on there the obvious answer is to read your book, obviously, but if you could, riff a little bit and tell us kind of
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sour beer takes a long time, and what's the old, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. The sooner if you love drinking sour beers, you want to make sour beers, the sooner you can start, the better, because you will be waiting 6 months or a year or whatever it is. My best advice at home, what made it work better for me, was to sort of hand down my old clean gear. If that bottling bucket's starting to look pretty scratched up, or that the tubing starting to look a little cloudy, and you would have thrown it out or replaced it anyway, you can start putting that stuff aside in a spare closet or somewhere else. And then pretty soon you might have enough stuff just to make sour beer in that old gear. I would sort of use my primary fermenters for 3 years, 4 years, and hey, maybe I'd like to get some SS Brewtech buckets. Okay, I'll hand down my old Spidels to my sour beers. Cool. It's sort of it's if you need an excuse to upgrade anything, oh well, I can just keep using the old stuff for sour beers. I think the easiest way to get started is split batches. After a few years of doing 5-gallon batches, I stepped up to a 10-gallon system. No sparge, just like a super easy system to brew on. But basically, almost every batch I would split. So some it would be 2 clean beers, IPAs with different dry hops are pretty easy. But hey, half a batch of Pilsner and half a batch of Brett Saison. I mean, a 1050 wort with a bunch of Saaz in it is pretty close to Saison DuPont or Pilsner or Kel. But you could do, Brett Saison or whatever. English brown ale could just as easily be, a sour brown, a Kolsch or a American wheat beer, great beers to, sort of base a sour on. Sometimes you have to be a little creative. I might do Hefeweizen and then water down some of the wort to make a Berliner Weiss to a lower gravity, something like that. If you don't want to do, or don't have a 10-gallon system, or don't want to do something like that, if you can just eat even 6 gallons of wort out of a batch, or you're willing to sort of take a 1-gallon deficit, just get some 1-gallon jugs and start throw ball dregs from a sour beer you enjoy in on it. Try a couple, get a few things going, and just sort of have some options for blending or learning, if you don't think you want to have big 5-gallon carboys going. I always like splitting sour batches. That I would have 5 gallons of sour red, and I'd put a couple gallons into a little 3-gallon carboy on cherries. So I'd have a couple gallons of cherries and a couple gallons plain. I still have, I haven't homebrewed now really in a couple of years, if you don't count wine and some other things like that. But I still have a basement full of really fun and interesting sour beers that were bottle conditioned that are still delicious. Some of them getting more delicious, some of them getting slightly less delicious. So I've always enjoyed that aspect of it, that I can go down and grab a bottle, go, wow, I haven't seen so-and-so that I brewed with this, in a couple of years. Hey, let me shoot them a text with a photo of it and ask them if they've got any bottles of it left. It's just a little bit of something special that got put away. That's with the fruit character, hey, I've got my wife and I have a cherry tree out back, and we have done a couple of sour beers with the cherries from our cherry tree. You can put foraged ingredients in. It really is a more I don't love that a lot of beer, and we do it too, it's like brewed out of a catalog. As brewers, we have access to the same 30 malts, the same 25 yeast, the same 25 hops. And you can make a lot of variations by varying those percentages and what you choose. Basically an unlimited combination. Or the same, the same Oregon fruit purees, the same, we're all kind of, and particularly as a professional brewer now that there's, I don't remember if it's 7,000 or 8,000 breweries, it's hard to do anything that's really special and unique when you and everybody around you is just picking the same ingredients and putting them together in slightly different, amounts and timings. And, you can do a better job on your, fermentation temperature control or whatever. But I find it much more fascinating to make beers that we are the only one who's going to have a beer with wineberries, and you've never had a beer with wineberries. I didn't even know what a wineberry was until we did a collab with a local chef who loved foraging. It's a native to Asia, cousin of the raspberry that was brought over here and sort of broke containment. It sort of tastes like jelly donuts. It's like, that's a much more interesting thing to me than kettle sour with Oregon raspberry, which again is something we've done and is also delicious, but it's just not as special or unique. And sour beer, because those microbes can be, it just like adds so much more variation. Even if you have the same microbes in the same barrels with the same wort, those two barrels are not going to taste exactly the same. They may not even taste remotely the same. I think that that's just like one of those things that makes sour beer like a little more special, a little more interesting, a little bit more, just like more exciting, more unique. And that's one of the things I really love about making sour beer at home. It also, like, just like as a former economist, like, brewing sour beer is pretty cheap. What you're really paying for when you buy it is the time, the labor of, rather than just putting 300 gallons into a tank, you had to clean 5 barrels, you had to taste 5 barrels, you had to blend some number of those barrels, you had losses, you had storage time, all those sorts of things. But if you've got some spare room, like, most of those things are pretty low effort. It's just make sure the airlock's topped up, taste it once in a while. Blending is great, but you really don't have to blend. I mean, blending is mostly for consistency. If you're willing just to let beers, hey, this one's a little more acidic, this one's a little less acidic, that's fine. You really don't have to worry about it too much.
That's great. The next question is from Jake Jeffers. What do you think will be the next big trend in craft beer styles?
I mean, at the moment, it is seltzer. I mean, I don't know if that's already, but craft seltzer is very much upon us, and that can take a couple of forms. So this weekend, we're releasing our first seltzer, and it is almost 49% Cabernet Franc wine grapes. So rather than just add a vial of mango flavoring or something like that, it's got big color, big flavor, but otherwise is it had sugar in it. It had a bunch of yeast nutrient, and we used a strain from Berkeley yeast that frees 3MH and 3MHA, which are really tropical passion fruity sort of aromatics. They're actually in malt. So rather than having to get them from the hops, they can be in malt. So we've used it in IPAs and sours, but then it's also the same compounds in grapes. So it has a really fun tropical flavor, and then grapes. We have yet to do sort of the smooge or the smoogie or whatever thing with seltzers, which seems to be picking up speed. So essentially, clean seltzer base, and then post fermentation fruit or sort of desserts type flavors. At the moment, after the last year, after the last 5 years, however many years all this stuff has been going on for, I think people want a little more escapism. People want Avengers movies, and people want beers that are not going to challenge them or make them sound stupid because it's got some word they've never heard of. They want a big ice cream sandwich hug, and that's fine. As a professional brewer, I like brewing some beers more than others, but my primary goal is to make beer that makes people happy and makes people want to come and hang out and drink beer. And for us, that means making variety, but also means making some stouts that are, that have walnuts and vanilla and chocolate and whatever else in them, that are not obnoxiously bitter, that are, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have brewed this. These sort of stouts are getting ridiculous. We get complaints our stouts are too dry that finish at 1050. A lot of places now that people are excited about have stouts finishing at 1060, 1070. I personally saw a hydrometer floating in one that was over 1080 for an 11% stout. So that's like a stout that started at like I think it was like 1160 to 1085 or something like that. That was too much for me. But I think that's like people don't want to be challenged by a minerally acidic, barrel aged, weird, sour as much as they just want something that tastes like candy or something that tastes like a juice smoothie ice cream sundae.
Michael, I think the
yeah.
objective word there is that the beer finishes at whatever,
Yeah.
as opposed to just putting out unfermented, fully fermented product and having the cans explode, which has been obviously a problem too.
Oh, definitely. And that's certainly is like a different piece of that discussion. Yes. Like I have personally talked to brewers who like blame their distributor for letting the beer get warm. And I don't trust anyone. I wouldn't, we don't have the heart to like, we'll do things where we'll like to a keg add orange juice to a double IPA, which is delicious, but we will not sell growlers unless it's someone that the bar manager really knows and really understands and promises, I'm taking this home to my wife. We're going to drink it tonight. I will not bring it anywhere. I will not open it with anyone else. I'd rather you just bought our double IPA and bought a thing of Tropicana and dumped some juice into it. I would certainly never intentionally sell a packaged product that had any chance of having carbonation issues, but I also know brewers who, do that once or twice and get a big line around their building and try to keep up. The brewers that are doing it right are sterile filtering the beer or the seltzer before it goes on to the fruit and using, aseptic purees and things like that. But it sounds like a lot of work and I'm trying to avoid it.
All right, next question is from Matt Bechtold. What, if anything, can be done to make Saison more popular in the United States?
That's exactly what I was just talking about. And so it's tricky. Like Saison has become like one of the the cooler styles. I'm not sure how much it resembles what Saison was 10 years ago. A bunch of the guys who are regulars at our brewery were also sort of like a beer drinking bottle share group. I was just over one of their houses last night drinking ungodly amounts of Hill Farmstead Saison, which I mean just sell out instantly and barrel aged and soured and whatever. And that's kind of the question, is like, where is the line? They call them Farmstead ales or whatever it is. They're certainly Saison referenced in terms of their origins, but they are a lot more acidic and a lot funkier than modern Belgian Saison is anyway. I mean, we do Saisons and they are a little more acidic and people like them, but I definitely don't think they're a super popular style. I think sadly Saison is in its, if you change Saison enough that people like it, is it can be Saison still. Saison is dry, it's expressively yeast driven, it's kind of the stuff that Americans aren't real excited about. I mean, I guess you can rebrand it as, put IPA in the name. I think is usually sort of the trick, where people are doing cold IPAs now and people are doing, I guess you'd call it, a brute Belgian IPA and just make a hoppy Saison or something like that. I think I'd say Saison has sort of a weird history. I mean, the reason that the alcohol started getting pushed up, in the 60s and 70s was to make it a more connoisseur product and make it, something that seemed a little more special and worth a little higher price. And what Saison was 100 years ago probably doesn't, resemble what it was 20 years ago. What it was 20 years ago doesn't resemble, what it is now. And I assume it will keep going more in that expressive, funky, sort of direction. And there are places they're still doing a great job making saisons, but the line between sort of wild ale and saison has sort of been blurred quite a bit. I personally really like saisons in that phase before they fully go wild. I mean, I love wild ales too, but I love when it still tastes like a saison. It's just a little bready. One of the sort of fun things you can do at home if you make your own saison is if you're bottling it, just take a little dropper or something like that and add a couple of drops of Brett to each bottle and mark them. So get a little vial of White Labs Brett Brux and give yourself a 6-pack of Brett Brux ones and a 6-pack of Classenii ones and a 6-pack of Sactois ones, whatever you want. And then open, say, one, once a month, sit down, you and a friend, you and a couple of people, and open one of each and see how they've changed. And if there's a particular arc that you like, one when it's younger or one when it's older, it's a really sort of interesting and fun way to learn and have a beer.
Awesome. And then the last question we have is a bit of a fun one, I think. And it comes from Ryan Metcalf, member of Lawrence Brewers Guild. For the popsicle beer tweet, was the can pre-cut before filling and freezing, or how did you pull that off? I'm not sure that the GIF is working or not. It looks like it is, but it's pretty cool. So yeah, please.
No, so that was. I do almost all the social media for Sapwood. I personally feel like I don't love breweries where it very much feels like the social media is run by the front of house, where it's here's today's lunch special, we have a new IPA on, and don't forget to buy some merch. So we also know that like we have probably a higher than normal amount of like home brewers and beer nerds and things like that. That said, the thing that gets traction on social media is like fun stuff. And so it was a real hot day, and I'd been joking about it for a couple of days. I opened the can of beer, I poured it out, knocked as much CO2 as I could out. I then poured it into just a can that hadn't been seamed. So it's like a fresh blank can, wrapped a label on it. My wife came up with the idea of it. It was like a plastic fork, and then she put a hair clip to keep it sort of, so it didn't fall all the way into the can. And then I cut it afterwards. So it was cut with probably a real insult to anyone who loves knives. I had a good boning knife, and I just went around and sawed it. I resharpened it afterwards. And yeah, so after it was frozen, I just ran under a little warm water for 10 seconds just to make sure it had enough melt to come out. It was actually pretty good. So that was Tropical Pop was a lot of passion fruit juice and mango puree, and then we used that strain from Berkeley that produces a lot of sort of thiol, passion fruity sort of flavors. Yeah, it's taken us a while to find good fruit sources like processed. At our scale, luckily, we can just ask for samples, and we'll just taste through a bunch of samples and make notes. But the same company, like I think Oregon Fruit does good stuff. Their guava is fantastic. We tried their lemon, and it's just like the worst tasting lemon juice you've ever had in your entire life. And it's just like it's amazing to me that the same company can make one product that I love and one product that just is really weird and off. And so mango was one of those, like we didn't love the Oregon mango. We finally found a place that had good mango puree. So as a professional brewer, I would just say to home brewers, take good notes on really specifically like what sort of ingredients you're getting. That's really an essential part of it. Oh, it's awful. Oh, really? Oh. Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool. It definitely looked like there was some sort of like shavings, but maybe it was just aluminum shavings coming off as I went around it or something. Cool. Any sort of follow-up questions? Or are we supposed to drink this beer? I've been staring at it for like an hour.
We are. So that's happening like pretty much right now. Yeah. Going a little late, but I love it, man. You're riffing, and it's awesome. Such great content. So, anyways, we're done with questions. That was the last one. The tasting is Saison MF. So if you guys want to go ahead now and grab your beers, those who have them, and we'll get started with that. I have to grab mine real quick too. So.
While that's going on, I have kind of skipped through some of your pictures, Michael, that you added as a sort of way. And while we're waiting here, we have the interesting connection of breweries and how incestuous, if you will, a lot of breweries are owned by various people and insourcing and outsourcing. One thing in here, where is the Duval ownership group? So we're from Lawrence, Kansas, which is just outside of Kansas City by about 30 miles. So we actually have the Duval World Headquarters, or U.S. headquarters here in Kansas City because of them purchasing Boulevard. And I was personally curious. So Boulevard's famous Saisons are Tank 7 and Saison Brett. Have you tried those beers at all, or?
Yeah. No, I was lucky enough to go to Kansas City for work 4 or 5 years ago, but no, I've been a big fan of Saison Brett for a long time. I can't remember if I still have a bottle downstairs. That's the kind of thing that, like, sadly now, because Saison's not cool anymore, will sit around on shelves around here. And I'll often see a 2-year-old bottle on super sale for $8 or whatever. And I can't say no to Brett Saison for $8. Yeah, no, that poster was a lot of fun to make. It's been weird. There haven't been a huge number of acquisitions in the last year and a half or so. For a while, it felt like every 2 weeks there was some big shocking sale. New Belgium, I think, was sort of probably the last of the big ones. And Dogfish had going to Sam Adams and all that. And the pandemic has really put, for whatever reason, there just haven't been a lot of acquisitions.
You made a poster?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I'm not much of a graphic designer. It's all very handmade. I'm sure there's some more efficient way to do it. I was inspired. There was every once in a while you'll see on social media. There's I think it's like a food one, like who Kraft owns, who General Mills owns, very much in that same sort of white black box sort of thing. And I thought it'd be fun to do for beer. It's been sort of on the back burner that I've wanted to do one. A lot of those companies now also own liquor or kombuchas or all those sorts of things, but that is just a beer one. Until like 2 weeks ago, was available for sale on my blog, and then the drop shipper told me that I would have to get releases from every single brand whose logo I used to continue, and I'm not going to try to get that many. Honestly, a lot of the probably 10 or 15 of those logos were people reaching out to me and say, hey, you've got our logo from 2 years ago. We just did a rebrand. Could you please, swap in our new one? I do a version with all the Maryland breweries on it, and that's caused nothing but indignation from local breweries that I haven't updated it when they've opened, or I put somebody on who's only in planning, or it's a real, anytime you do something like that, the answer is usually, if you want it different, you do it. This is the way I did it. There are a lot of complaints. I have the Vatican on there. That was a big point of contention. I've got the Vatican above, the Trappists, the Franciscans, and I forget who the third one is. The Dominicans? I don't remember. There are three monastic orders that have breweries.
Fun. That sounds fun. So I have poured my beer and it looks lovely.
We have a couple slides on it as well. A little bit about the beer. This is a Saison. It's brewed with the mad fermentationist Saison blend from Bootleg Biology. I've got the recipe and a slide here coming up, but I thought we would talk a little bit about the actual yeast blend. I could talk about it real quick. Mike, I know you probably know a lot more than me. If you want to give a little info, or
Sure. The blend started as it was 2 strains from the Yeast Bay. It was their like Saison blend something. It had back when White Labs was selling it as Brett Trois, but it was actually the Sac Trois after that got sort of unearthed. It had a lactobacillus in it. And then it had a Brett strain that a buddy of mine who used to run a blog called, it was like Science Brewer. His name was Jason Rodriguez. He pulled out of a Cantillon Blah beer, their bilberry lambic that they do for someplace in Sweden or Denmark. And I just did one batch with it. I did like a hoppy Saison. And once I kicked the keg, I was like, wow, that beer was really good. That, that yeast character with that hop was really fantastic. And in a classic do as I say, not as I do, I took that keg out of the fridge, swirled up the last, inch that was below the dip tube, and I dumped it into a flask and spun it up and did another batch with it. And so that yeast has been through some real, it's been through the ringer. And then after doing that 6 or 7 times, Jeff is an old friend. He used to live in the DC area from Bootleg Biology, Jeff Mello. He'd been bugging me to like do something. I just didn't want to like pick some yeast or something. So I was like, hey, here's something that, I've been using. And it's gone really well. It's been really fun to get to taste things made with something that, was cultured out of my kegs years ago.
okay, sorry, I stepped away for just a second. As far as the recipe goes, if you guys have any questions about any of my process or anything like that, I can talk, and try to answer those. But basically, this is a clone or a base clone of Tank 7 from Boulevard, which is one of my favorite Saisons. I've been brewing this for a long time. The recipe is not mine. Found it online as a Tank 7 clone. Just recently, within like the past year, found out it's actually David Shoemaker, or Schumacher's, I'm not sure you say his name, from the Beermeisters. So pretty cool. I've been brewing this for several years, long before I knew anything about that. It's got Amarillo in it and flaked corn. I just really like that base. I think this yeast actually worked really well with this as well.
Yeah, it's real nice. The hops, I think, work really well. We've had trouble getting good Amarillo, but we've had some real like oniony Amarillo, but this just has like a nice, pleasant, like orangey fruitiness to it.
And this is 2020 Yakima Valley hops Amarillo. So just, what we can get as homebrewers is, a little different than probably what you can grab. But
I literally ordered from Yakima Valley 3 hours ago. we do have some hop contracts, but they don't have everything, and sometimes you just need something. Particularly, spot hops, or I don't even know if they still call it spot hops. They have like a wholesale portal that's very similar.
So this is the first time I've ever gotten down or really had a beer that got so dry, like 0.999 of a final gravity. Just blew my mind with it. But I think it works really well with the style. It brings it real dry. The one thing that I didn't really get with the Tank 7, as far as the clone, is the color. The 5.1 SRM, and I mean, you can see kind of in the glass or whatever, it's a little lighter than what their Saison is. But have you had, Mike, have you had any of the Boulevard Tank 7 or Saison Brett beers.
Yeah, no, luckily Boulevard has sent out this way for quite a while, and those have. I always enjoy Tank 7 in particular in the summertime. It's I always forget how big it is until I have two of them. I'm always just like, oh, this is just like a fun 5%. Oh no, it's 7 point something.
Yeah, and this one's 8%. I guess I did kind of have a little question. So I did, fermentation wise, I did 75 degrees for like 4 days, ramped it up to 82, kept it there for 5 or 6 days, and then transferred to secondary, got it off, off the yeast shrub, left it in secondary for almost 75 days. And I guess I was really thinking that I would pick up a little more Brett than I did in that time period. And I know patience is a virtue. I probably could have picked up a little bit more had I waited. I did start to see like my first Brett bubbles right about the time that I decided to transfer to the keg. I wanted it to be ready for this event. So do you think if I would have left it for another couple months, we would have seen a little bit more Brett character shine through? Or
So I'll say the blend is not super funky. It's definitely like it will get a little funkier than this, but definitely it never develops that sort of like really big, just like funk bomb sort of thing. I find I would get more like under pressure, like bottle conditioning or something like that. Keg conditioning is usually what I would do. So that was like when I would do a hoppy saison, usually it'd be like 2 weeks in primary or whatever. And then I'd go into the keg with a little bit of sugar and probably a little less sugar than full carbonation, just because it's always easier to add a little more than it is to take out a little. But that would leave it warm for like 4 or 6 weeks. But honestly, like this is about as funky as it would usually get for me in that sort of scenario. What we do at the brewery is we'll barrel age and then add additional Brettanomyces usually. And so we view this culture more as sort of like neutral is not the right word, but it's definitely like a milder base that then can be augmented rather than necessarily a micro jubilee all on its own.
I'll say, Josh, that if you got this is David's recipe of a Tank 7 clone. Knowing David and knowing when this recipe was sort of cloned off of Boulevard's Tank 7, and who the ambassador brewer was at the time at Boulevard, this is probably very, very close to their malt bill. Boulevard has historically been very loose with their malt bills and very tight with their actual yeasts. Case in point, unfiltered wheat is one of their claim to fame beers, and they literally strip all of their fermenting yeast out and then add yeast back just to get that haziness in their beer later. So knowing Jeremy, who was the ambassador brewer at the time, and David, who's a big name in the Kansas City homebrewing community, they probably chatted in private about this malt bill, and so it's probably within very close tolerances of what the actual malt bill is in the brewery.
I actually have about a 6-pack or whatever, and had them side by side, and I really like, even obviously clearly different yeasts. I still really felt that they're very similar beers. Their Amarillo or whatever they're using has a much more floral note than mine came with, as far as like the hops and stuff. But I did think they were similar. Does anybody have any comments on the color or the taste or anything like that before we kind of wrap up the official part of the tasting, I guess, or any questions, I guess?
Well, I thought that Mike's comments on the level of funkiness was really helpful, because I know you and I discussed the level of funkiness in this beer. So that's really good to know that this right here is probably about where it's going to hit, unless you maybe condition with it or something else. So that's good to know. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and I haven't, I didn't keg condition. That's something I want to get into. I tried once with a Belgian quad just recently, and I don't know if my yeast was tired, but it just did not finish. Ended up having to force carb it, and it was a little sweeter than I wanted it to be. I do want to try it again, so I really do need to get into that. I think this would have benefited from that, so I will in the future try that again.
And I'm getting ready to do a Brett beer, and I think that's pretty interesting technique to keg condition. I think I might try that on mine to get a little extra something.
It's fun, and the nice thing about doing it in a keg versus bottle condition is you can always vent down the keg. If it comes to that, safety release.
This is a beautiful beer, Josh. You did great. I would like to drink more.
Yeah. Well, I only made a 5.5 gallon batch, and I bottled it pretty much up for everybody. There's still some on tap, but it's going to kick pretty much any minute. So I guess get over here pretty fast. I've been trying not to drink it specifically so that I had enough bottles to distribute. But,
I'll see you soon.
and I do, on the notes from Bootleg Biology, they talk about the stone fruit from the Brett, and so I think I get a little bit of that. I didn't attribute it to the Brett before or whatever, but I mean that could easily be elsewhere as well. But
Yeah, it's my impression is it's slightly fruity and then also slightly spicy. But it's really good.
yeah, and I think the phenols or whatever from the Saison yeast are fairly mild for the style probably, but I really like how that turned out.
Yeah, I have to admit I would like a little bit more phenolic character in most of my saisons, but because what's there now is kind of coming across a little bit maybe grassy, a little bit green grass, like fresh cut, but it's overall it's very good. Well done.
Thank you. Well, I think that's pretty much all we have, unless there's some other questions on the recipe or other questions for Mike. I think it's been some super awesome content. I'm really happy and pleased with this event, Mike. Thank you for joining us and for just really performing a great meeting. So.
No, it's a real pleasure to do things like that. The last year is actually, I hate traveling. Like I love traveling, but it's also like it's a headache, it's a hassle, getting on planes, checking hotels, going to things. It's really fun just like pop into different homebrew clubs around the country and just get to hear what people are interested in. And I mean, it's always great to have questions like these that were all like very clearly from places that were like very interested and had pulled something out of some blog post from a couple years ago, those sorts of things. It's great to go back on those. And I'm happy my local homebrew club has just started in-person meetings. We had our first one a couple of weeks ago, and now everyone is showing up to my house in a couple of weeks to pick up balls from Sapwood, and then they're going to drink them on Skype. So I'll get to do this again for my homebrew club.
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, but please, if you ever find yourself in the Maryland, DC zone and can make it to the brewery, let me know if I'm around. I'm happy to give you a little tour or chit chat or whatever. But yeah, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy drinking the beer and getting to meet all of you.
I think that's a great idea. We need to check our club funds, maybe. Maybe that's something.
That's a long trip, but we can do it.
And Mike, you're welcome to stick around for a little while. Once we kick off the live stream, we kind of chat and hang out and enjoy. So feel free. I know it's been a long night.
I appreciate it. I think I'm going to call it a night though.
Well, thank you very much for your time and the gracious offer.
Yeah, thank you. I'll hopefully see all of you at some point. either in Lawrence or in the DC zone. Cheers.
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 And that is it for tonight. Stick around, hang out, and we will be in person in August. Thank you.
We're good.
Cool, thanks.
Recording stopped.
And the nut round bowl, and his brandy in the glass, and little Sir John and the nut round bowl.
It would have been nice if you could have cut right where I became scatterbrained. Just started like jabbering because I didn't know what to say. So. I know he moved quick. It's great.
Not so loudly to blow his horn. And the tinker he can't mend kettle nor pots without a little barley coat. All I wanna do is drink beer for breakfast. All I wanna eat is them barbecue chips. All I want is someone just to try to protect us. You can try, but you never wanna try to defect us. 20, where I'm from. Mama, baby, over the bum. All I wanna do is stand in this line. All I wanna pick is your nose, honey, high. Sweet little corn, you gotta be hot. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. Honey, where I'm from.
Thanks.
Living for the bum. Where I'm from. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Baby boy bum. Baby boy bum. Baby boy bum. All I wanna do is drink beer for breakfast.
I like beer cause it is good. I drink beer because I should. If there was a song to sing, I sing it and beer you bring. I drink beer when I am sad, cause the beer it makes me glad. Now there's nothing left to say, so let's go drink beer.
Beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. And stop, beer is good, beer is good, beer is good.
Let's go drink some beer.
No, I was just laughing.
When it's warm it tastes real crappy, but cold beer will make me happy. When I throw up on the floor, I can go and drink some more. They say beer will make me dumb. It are go good with pizza.
Well, I think I can
Now that we have drunk
resign
some beer,
from
let's go
VP
drive
now.
a car.
Beer is good, beer is good, beer is good.
I'm a fanboy of Mike, man. Like, I've used that. Read most of his blogs.